It's a genuine privilege to be with you again this morning with a cup of coffee and the dangers of having a cafe in your church, which means that you have permanent access to coffee at all hours of the working day. We're going to just move into another time together, but as we do that, let's just pause for a moment and be still, and I'm going to lead us in a word of prayer, and then we'll make a start. However you come into this day, with whatever emotions, whatever feelings, whatever thoughts, joys, sorrows, hopes, anxieties, may the seeking one find you. May the welcoming one receive you. May the redeeming one save you. May the loving one fill you. May the guiding one lead you. May the living one renew you. May the rejoicing one delight in you. May the grieving one comfort you. May the protecting one hold you. And may Father, Son, and Holy Spirit bless you this day. Amen. Amen. I know that a couple of people have put up on the screen about the prayer that I used yesterday. What I'm going to do later on in the session is just send to you on the chat my email address. If you want a copy of that prayer, just ping me over an email and I'll just send it back to you. So I'll make sure that I do that this morning, and then you'll be able to have access to that prayer. This morning, I just wanted to kind of move on from what we were talking about yesterday morning in terms of creation, and just look for a moment with you about the command in the Ten Commandments to honor the Sabbath, because we're talking about moving out of Sabbath and doing ministry and mission, and so I just wanted to reflect a moment on this command that we find, the fourth commandment, to honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. You see, we come to the Ten Commandments and we kind of view them within this framework of the law. But I think that it's important as we come to that we need to reimagine what it is that we mean when we talk about the law. Because we talked yesterday about creation, and if you look back at the Genesis poems in Genesis 1 and 2 about creation, then we see that the earth is created with this great vibrancy, with color, with life and variety and so on. And then you come to the Ten Commandments and you can kind of view them very cold, and they're written on stone, which is kind of cold and hard and so on. And it seems a world away from the creation that God has made around us, and all its beauty and all its vibrancy. And so it's important for us just to reimagine what it is that we mean when we talk about the law. With the Ten Commandments, one of the exercises that I do with people when I talk about this stuff, and I'm not going to do it with you guys this morning, is I say to people, I want you to break up into groups, and I want you to reorder the Ten Commandments in order of priority. What is the most important commandment, and then go all the way down. Now, some people have refused to do that. because they feel that, you know, God has put the 10 commandments in the order that they are in, and who am I to change them? I do gently remind people that we're not actually rewriting the Bible, but we are just trying to understand what's behind these commandments and why they're significant and why they're important. And why do we put some value, higher value to some commandments and not to others? For example, if your job, and I'm hoping that, you know, this isn't true for the majority of you, if your job required you to kill, then you would probably say, you know, even if that's in my job description, I'm not comfortable with that. Therefore, I'm not going to do it. But if your job requires you to break the Sabbath, you know, you say, well, okay, what harm can that do? And so we do, consciously or subconsciously, place a greater priority, a greater value to some of the commandments and less value to others. Now, when I've said to people before, why is it that we do that? The main answer that comes back from people is, well, because the impact on people's lives and society as a whole, if you take a life, is greater than the impact on society if you fail to keep the Sabbath. But my argument would be that if you look around you and you look around and see the increase in issues to do with stress in the workplace, if you look at the increase to do with mental health issues within the workplace, if you look at the level of family breakdown because of an imbalance between work and rest, then you see that actually this has a great degree of impact in the world in which we live, and in society, and in our families, and in our churches and our communities as well. So this view that this doesn't have an impact for society is one that I think we need to redress, and to ask those questions about, okay, well, if this commandment is important, maybe I need to take it more seriously. Interestingly, in the 10 commandments in Exodus, because you get the parallel passages in Exodus and Deuteronomy, in the passage in Exodus, more is written about the fourth commandment. More words are written about the fourth commandment than the other 9 commandments put together. So it's as if God kind of needed to spell it out for us. You know, this one I think you are going to struggle with. So I'm going to really spell it out to you, that it's important for you to keep the Sabbath. But you see, when we come often to the 10 commandments, we can view them in this very legalistic way. We can view them in this very cold, sort of stone-like way, where we view it as an obligation that we have to observe out of a kind of fear of religiosity, or that it becomes a burden. Not that the things themselves are burdens, but we can view it in that way. And you know, I think that, well, have you ever received a gift from someone, but in receiving it, you know, they haven't made you want to receive the gift? You know, someone's given you a gift in a way that makes you think, this isn't really a gift. You know, I somehow feel a sense of burden that you've given me. I don't use that analogy because it was my birthday yesterday and I got some bad presents. But I've certainly in the past received things from people where they give it to you, but there comes with it this burden that kind of robs you of the joy of receiving the gift. And sometimes, if we're not careful, we can do that to ourselves when we come to the 10 commandments, is that we can receive it with this great sense of burden that robs us of the joy that this was given to us with as a gift. And I think particularly when we think about the Sabbath, so many people kind of have this view of the Sabbath as a burden, that somehow it encroaches upon my life and my working pattern. And that, you know, it's something which if I have time to do, then I'll do. But if I don't, then I'll just plow on through and keep on going. But actually, if we look at the Ten Commandments in the light of Torah, and Torah, which we have translated sometimes as law, instruction, at the root of it, pointing the way. And there's a great Jewish writer that I'm really fond of, a guy called Abraham Heschel. And Abraham Heschel said, "It is for the law to clear a path and for the soul to sense the spirit." So in that sense, what the law does is it clears a way. It points the way through the busyness and the clutteredness of our culture to give us the room and the space to sense the spirit. There was a story I heard once about a group of explorers who were trekking through the jungle. And they had a group of indigenous guides who were leading them because they know that quote. Yeah, sure, Emma, I'll repeat that quote. So it is for the law to clear the path and for the soul to sense the spirit. So these tribes people were leading the explorers through the jungle, and they needed to get to a particular point before darkness fell. And so they were trekking through and trying to make good pace. And about halfway there, the indigenous guides stopped and sat down on the floor. And this kind of really frustrated the explorers, because they were saying, "Come on, we've got a time frame we need to stick to. We've got to get to this place by a certain time, otherwise the light's going to fade." And after a little while, the guides stood up and they carried on guiding, and they got to the place they were meant to get to at the right time. And one of the explorers asked the guide, "Why did you guys stop, like in the middle of our journey?" And the guide replied, "Because we were waiting for our souls to catch up." Now, how many of us have worked at a pace and a rhythm where we've just needed time for our souls to catch up? Where we've just needed time just to kind of reconnect with ourselves, to reconnect with God, to receive the fullness of the life that he has for us. That's what Sabbath is. It's a gift, and yet so often we view it as an obligation, because time, we have this weird relationship with time, don't we, where we're constantly viewing time as the enemy. I don't have enough time, or I wish that there was time, or I'm running out of time. And yet our whole world is governed by time. I've got a clock on my wall. I've got a watch on my wrist. I've got a clock on my phone. I walk out of the door and I look up at the church across the road from me, and they've got a massive clock on the side of their steeple. We are governed by time. Everywhere we look, there are reminders of tick, 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 the seconds going by and time going away. So, we need to kind of have this space and create this space and nurture this space where we step away from that pressure that is all around us, even though we're not aware of it throughout the day, where time kind of ticks on and becomes our enemy. In the parallel passage for the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy chapter 5, there's something which you don't have in the Exodus account, which is this verse. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there by his mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath. What's really interesting with the people receiving the Ten Commandments is that for all of those people, they were born in slavery. So all they had experienced up to that point in time was the slavery of Egypt. So it was bone breaking, skin breaking, back breaking work. It was oppressive work. It was work where the people become a commodity that is expendable, because what really matters is productivity. And actually, you can draw some parallels to that in the world in which we live in today. Not that the slavery of the Israelites in Egypt is comparable to a lot of our working patterns today, but do we live in a world where people have become a commodity, where what really matters is productivity, and that people's health, people's relationship, people's spirituality is expendable because what really matters is productivity? I think certainly we live in a world where that happens. And sadly, I think we live in there are churches where that culture, they wouldn't like to frame it in that way, but there are churches where that culture exists very much as well. And so here we have this people gathered at the foot of the mountain, having experienced all their lives the bitterness of slavery, and they receive this instruction that they will rest, that written into the very fabric of the laws that govern them is rest. What that must have been like, I mean, take a moment to imagine what that must have been like for a people who had only ever experienced work in this bone-breaking, skin-breaking, soul-crushing way, to experience God giving them permission to rest. Must have been, I mean, so freeing. And so again, here is this gift of Sabbath that is about liberation. It's about liberation from expectation. It's about liberation from the slavery of those patterns and attitudes that view you as a commodity, that are part of this kind of system of productivity. It's taking you out of that to root you within a deeper truth, within a deeper meaning. And how many people within our churches, within our communities, within the places that we find ourselves would say that they had become a slave to work? Or if you were to ask the families of those people whether they had become a slave to work, or put it closer to home, if you were to ask your families whether at times you have become a slave to work, how would they answer? Because for me, and I alluded to this yesterday, there are patterns that I've had in the past where my working pattern has been, well, to call it a pattern at all really was stretching it, because I just worked and worked and worked. And it was, part of it was, I think at the time as a young minister, I came into ministry at the age of 24. I was ordained at the age of 24. And, you come into it with this sort of Messiah complex that, you can make the difference, and you can, and it's not that I don't believe that we can make a difference, but every people who were just really bitter and angry and so on within the church. I thought I can win those people over, and it took me 5 years and a great deal of heartache to realize that those people didn't want to be won over. And what happened was that I almost broke myself trying to fix people who didn't want to be fixed, and working all hours of the day and working through my day off, and being sat there in the small hours of the morning, having already worked a full day, kind of doing stuff, and that is not sustainable. It's not sustainable physically, it's not sustainable emotionally, or spiritually, or relationally. And in the end, all of those things suffered for me. All of those things started to wear thin for me. And it took this moment of just everything kind of almost coming crashing down to kind of sit down and address some of those issues, to sit down and say, okay, well, what is a pattern that works? And, for me, we literally sat down and made a list, my wife and I. Okay, well, what do I need? If we're going to continue in ministry, what do I need? And actually, we live in a world where people find it really hard to ask for what they need. And people find it even harder to be self-aware enough to ask themselves what they need. But actually, one of the bravest things that you can do is to learn what you need and have the courage to ask for it. And so for us, we sat down and we said, okay, what is it that I need? And at the time, we had come to the end of ministry at the church we were in. We felt that it was time to move on. And as we came into the new place where I am now, here in Bath, we sat down and said, okay, well, what do you need? What do I need? And we'll talk to the leaders about it when we do the interview process and stuff. And I said, okay, well, we're making a list. I want to work 5 days a week, not 6, because I'll be more productive working 5 than I would 6. And you will get more out of me over 5 days than you would over 6. I want to have a quiet day every month where I can go and just spend time being quiet, being still, reflecting and meeting with God in that way. I want to have a retreat a year, a 4-day retreat or whatever it is a year. These were the things that I put on this list. And I went into that meeting and do you know what I felt? I felt not worth the list I'd written. That's what I felt. I felt no one is going to say yes to this, because what they're getting is me, and I'm not worth this other stuff. And actually, it took my wife Bex just to keep bashing it home to me. You are worth this. You are worth this. You're worth making sure, and our relationship and your other relationships and your health are worth bringing this list before these. And I expected them to say no. And just like that, they said yes. And actually, my fear was that my expectations of myself were far higher than their expectations of me. And I read a really interesting book, and where is it? I was reading through it again this morning. This book, if you haven't read it before, it's backwards on the screen. It's called Going the Distance by Peter Brain. I read this book every year. I have read this book every year. And he's an Australian vicar, Anglican vicar. based in Perth in Western Australia. And he does this survey in the book between other clergy in Perth. And he asks them to write down, this is how many hours a week I work. And so they write down how many hours a week they work. And then he asks their diaconate or their PCC or equivalent, whatever it is, what is your expectation of how many hours your vicar should work? And on average, the expectation of the ministers was 15 hours a week more than the expectation of the team around them. And I think that was highlighted for me in terms of how I felt when I went into that meeting, is that my expectations are often so much higher than the expectations that the people around me have. And the only way to get around that is to have an honest conversation and to say, you know, if it becomes an issue for you, if you're sitting there and you're honestly thinking this balance isn't right, then maybe to sit down and have a conversation. There will always be one person. There will always be one Egyptian slave master within your team somewhere. And you can probably picture them in your head right now. I know that I can. But the majority of people, if it's a good team of people, they are people who are for you. And they understand that in order for you to be able to give, in order for you to be able to lead, you also have to take the time and space to care for yourself. And that self-care is really, really important for you. And so that exercise of writing down what you need, I'd encourage you to do that, to sit down and say, hey, if I had to design what I need in terms of rest, what would that look like? You know, if I had to say every day, what would that look like? Every week, what would that look like? Every month, every year, what would that look like to me? What do I want that to look like? Sit down and write it out. And then look at that list and say, okay, how can I make that happen? Because, and I'm conscious, not all of you might be pastors, but for me, one of the things that is great, but also dangerous about the work that we do is that we have a tremendous amount of freedom. That really nothing goes into my diary that I don't choose to put in it. There might be pressures on me to put certain things in at certain times, but ultimately it only goes in there because I choose to put it in there. And actually I was struck by something Eugene Peterson wrote. He said, I am busy because I am lazy. And what he meant by that was that he hadn't taken the time to diary properly. He hadn't spent the time to kind of work out how the week was going, and therefore he became busier than he needed to be. So write down that list, but then also look at it. Don't just leave it as a wish list. You know, I do this at the start of every year. I write down sort of things that I wanted to do in the year. And then I get to the end of the year, I get to next year when I'm doing the list, and I look back and go, oh yeah, I had wanted to do that, didn't I? But I didn't do anything with it. I wrote it down and it felt good to write it down, but then I didn't refer back to it or plan to do any of the things that I'd said I wanted to do. So write the list, but then sit down and say, okay, well, how can I make this happen? And do I need to have conversations with the people around me? Do I need to talk to my family about some of these things? Do I need to not talk to anyone, but just to plan better and to sit down and work out, okay, this chunk of my diary, this is going to be this. So I'm going to start each day with an hour just reading and being still and reflecting. And that's going to be that chunk of time, whatever it looks like for you. And it will look different for all of you because rest looks different for all of us, doesn't it? You know, some people love just sitting down and being still and being quiet, and that's rest. But for some people, that's like the worst thing, the least restful thing. And going out, hiking up a mountain somewhere or going and doing that, that's restful for them. So be self-aware enough to know as well that when we say rest and Sabbath, what we don't mean is sat in a room in the quiet, not doing anything. It's about how God has made you and how God has wired you to receive the life that he has for you. And then being able to do those things, to understand that you are people. You are human. There was a quote I read recently that said, most ministers don't burn out because they forget they are ministers. They burn out because they forget they are people. And you are a person. You have needs. We focus so much on the needs of other people that we forget sometimes that we have needs. And if you were the pastor sitting down with yourself, what would you advise? How would you counsel yourself if you were to do that, if you were to look at the pattern between work and rest that you have? I'm conscious that not everyone comes, with the sense that the balance is out of whack for them. Some of you might be there thinking, actually, I've got a good balance at the moment. And that's great if that's you. Make sure that you maintain it. Make sure that you protect it. One of the things that when I moved to Manvers Street here, my wife Bex was 3 months pregnant when we moved with Leah, who's our only child. And so I started in the January. Leo was due to be born in the July. Now, I knew from my past track record that I would most likely throw myself into stuff, particularly early doors, to make a good impression, to find out what's going on, to put yourself about so that, people know that what they do is valued by the new, all of this kind of stuff. But what I tried to do to be really protective about from the word go was making sure I protected those rhythms and those patterns, because what would have been hard would have been to be like, here I am, like heart and soul and body and mind. And then in July, I have to pull back a bit because, I've become a father, or to be sort of fully heart and soul there, and even worse, to not pull back when I became a father and neglect my family. So I thought ahead to what was coming to say, okay, what would I want this to look like in 7 months' time? And let's start doing that now so that it can be seamless when that happens. And for me, that was making sort of simple rules. And the simple rule that I had at the time was that I would not be out of an evening more times in the week than I was in. So, that's 3 evenings a week that I would allow myself to work, and no more than that. And that meant at times having to juggle things. And, there are exceptions to the rule. I didn't want to be legalistic about it. When things come up or there are emergencies, and I said to my wife, look, I've got to have this meeting. Is that okay? Then yes, that's been fine. But it was an exception, not the rule. And so it's about, if it is a good pattern with you, think ahead to what's coming up. What might put a strain on that pattern? I'm conscious as well that at the moment, any sense of rhythm that we have has gone. Any sense of the normal patterns of your ministry is different now than it was in February 2020. And who knows when we're going to get back to any sense of what that was before, or even whether we should. Because one of the challenges, I think, as I've reflected on this time, in terms of this balance between work and rest, is that where people have had their priority in what they do, and I think we mentioned this yesterday, that who you are as a human being is more important than what you do. Where people's value and worth has come out of a sense of what they do, a lot of that for people has been stripped away this last year, because they've either had to be furloughed, or they've lost their job, or their working patterns have changed. And for some people, that's been really kind of disquieting. It's been really difficult. And but the challenge comes for me when things restart again. Because when your worth and your value is based on what you do, and that stops, that's really hard. But the temptation is then when that starts up again, to grab hold of that with all your might again, to double down on that pattern, because you've been, kind of held back from receiving the thing that you found worth and value from. It's like, when I tried to give up coffee for Lent a few years ago, and I got about 3 weeks in, and then realized that I'd become a horrible human being, and that it was much better to have the coffee and to reflect upon upon my need of it, and to switch down to more decaf. But having not had it for 3 weeks, I went on a bit of a coffee binge afterwards, because I hadn't had it. And we can be like that with work. If our value and stuff is based on our work, and then it's been deprived of us, when we get it back again, the temptation is going to be to go back into that, hardcore. And so my encouragement to you is the same as my encouragement to myself, is when that time comes, when normality comes back, just to be cautious, to be aware as you step back into that, and to remember it's not about what you do, it's about who you are, and to keep hold of that as you step back into the work, the rhythm, the pattern when it comes. I just want to read to you one thing that just alongside that, just something short, and it's actually from Advent, but we're living in this sort of time at the moment, which is a bit strange, and I think it applies for us as well. It says that the new thing that God seeks often occurs in times of disruption, when the familiar world has collapsed and the future is in doubt, when the days grow shorter and we wonder if darkness will swallow the light. God's new thing is the vision of something more, a hovering possibility that challenges the world as it is. And for me, within the world of work we have, within the cultures, within our churches, within the society we live in as a whole, what Sabbath is this new possibility that hovers over the surface of the world as it is, and challenges it and us to press into the more that God has for us, not as doers, but as beings who he deeply loves. Let me just pray, and then I know a couple of you have asked about the book I wrote, and so I'll just give you a quick plug for that. But let's just pray for a moment together. Lord, we come before you, and we know that you see us. You are El Roi, the God who sees us. And as you see us, Lord, would you give us eyes to see ourselves, to know those areas of our lives where we struggle and we need support, to know what it is that we need and the courage to ask for it. Lord, help us as we, in this time, are deprived of our patterns and rhythms. Lord, help us to find new ways that sustain us. And as we reflect throughout the rest of today on our mission out of a place of Sabbath, Lord, help us to realize that those two things aren't in competition with each other, but that they go hand in hand together. So bless us, Lord, we pray, in this coming day. In Jesus' name, amen. So the book, I have too many books. The book I wrote, which came out in November of 2019, is a book called Infused with Life, exploring God's gift of rest in the world of busyness. And it's looking at a lot of the themes that we've explored together over the past 2 mornings. So again, I was going to put my email address up on the chat. So let me just do that now. Everyone in the meeting. So you can, hopefully that has come up for you. You can buy this book online. If you want to, you can also buy it direct from me, which would be a blessing to me. I'm happy to sign it, which will automatically devalue it and post it out to you. So the book's at £9.99, and I think to post it is £1.53. If you want me to do that, just send me an email, and I'm more than happy to do that for you. I will also plug a book, which is a new book I've written. It's called Made to Belong. And it is exploring the whole issue of belonging and where we fit in a world that is quite tribal. That isn't even out yet. So if you would like a copy of that book, again, it's £9.99. Before it's even out to the public, then just send me an email and I'd be happy to send that to you as well. But that's just the plug. I think Hayley said people had asked where to get it.